Hi biologists. Let's start by looking at the learning objectives for this lesson. At the end of this section and following the biology syllabus, you should be able to describe the function and structure of the root system, explain the term meristem and give its location in the root, locate 3 tissue types, dermal, ground and vascular, in transverse and in longitudinal sections of the root. What does this actually mean? What are we trying to learn? Well, you have to be able to describe the functions and types of roots. You have to explain the term or the word meristem and be able to give its location in the root. You also have to be able to draw transverse sections or cross sections and a longitudinal section of the root and mark in the position of the 3 tissue types, dermal, ground and vascular. Let's go. Let's try to understand the organization of the parts of the flowering plant by looking at the root. What are the functions of roots? Well, the first function of a root is to absorb water and minerals, to take the water and the minerals, which are chemicals, out of the soil, to keep life easy, to suck the water and the minerals out of the dirt. Make sure that you include the minerals in this function. Now, the minerals are chemicals, as I said already, and this can be linked back to the chapter in food, where we came across chemicals that exist in the form of salts, and it is these salts that the plants absorb from the soil. The next function of the root is to anchor the plant into the ground. It holds it into the ground so that it doesn't blow over in a storm, a bit like a ship's anchor. When you put out anchor, the ship is held in the one position so it doesn't float away out to sea. The third function of the root is that it sometimes stores food. We know that roots store food if they look fat or swollen. Such roots would be carrots, parsnips and turnips. When we eat carrots, parsnips and turnips for our dinner, we're actually stealing the food that the carrot, parsnip and turnip plant went to the trouble of making for itself. The last function here, which I like to include, is that roots sometimes carry out vegetative reproduction or asexual reproduction, which we'll be studying later. Some roots, like the root tubers of dahlias, which are swollen roots, if these roots are separated and they contain a shoot at the top, then each separated root has the capacity to produce a new plant on its own. This is why root tubers carry out vegetative reproduction, an important function of some roots. Now, what are the types of roots? Well, there are taproots. As we've said already, taproots are fat roots. They are swollen like carrots, parsnips and turnips. They actually store food for the plant. That is why they're nutritious for us to eat. The other type of root would be fibrous roots. Fibrous roots are hairy, miserable, thin, stringy roots, rather like a bunch of hair pulled off a hairbrush. These are the roots that grass would have. You might have heard of grass roots. They tend to be shallow roots, meaning that they are found at the surface of the soil. We would have come across that idea in ecology, where the tap roots belonging to the dandelion would be in competition with the fibrous roots belonging to the grass. They can both live out on the lawn because they're occupying different niches. The grass roots will take the water from the surface of the soil, and the dandelion roots, the tap roots, are able to access the water from deeper down. The third type of root are adventitious roots. I like to imagine these as being a bit adventurous. They're a bit different from the normal roots. Now, in what sense are they different? Well, they go directly out of a stem. So when you think about an ivy plant that grows up the side of a house, how is it actually held there? Well, the ivy plant that grows up the side of a house is held there because it sends out little roots directly out of its stem that will help it to cling on to the wall of the house. And because these roots grow directly out of the stem, they're a little bit different, they're a bit adventurous, they're adventitious. Another place where we would see adventitious roots are the little roots that would grow out of the bottom of an onion bulb. These are adventitious roots as well because they grow directly out of a stem. Now, let's have a look at the structure of a root. Let's look at a longitudinal section. A longitudinal section is looking at the structure of the root lengthwise. When we examine the longitudinal section of a root, we notice the root cap. The root cap is found at the tippy top of the root, and to my mind it functions like a bicycle helmet. You wear a bicycle helmet to protect your head from injury. Here it's the same idea. The root has a root cap at the tippy top to protect its tip from damage as it burrows its way through the soil. There is the possibility that it would be injured against a stone. Immediately under the root cap is the meristematic zone, rather like your head inside in the helmet. The meristematic zone is the region where the new root cells are produced. They are produced by cell division or by mitosis. Put a ring on it because I like it. The M&Ms. M for mitosis and M for meristematic zone. The cells here are very small because they have just been formed and they are densely packed. As time moves on, these cells start to grow. They form the zone of elongation. The cells are all identical to each other. Their only function is to grow. They remind me of pupils in primary school. All the pupils in primary school do the same subjects. They are not divided into different groups or different subject areas. As time moves on, when the cells have grown, they start to differentiate. They start to change. Notice the word different in differentiation. In the zone of differentiation, the cells start to do different jobs. They start to carry out different functions. This is also called division of labour. So in the zone of differentiation, we see the formation of tissues. One tissue type would be xylem tissue, whose function is to carry water and minerals. Another tissue is phloem, whose function is to carry food. O in food, O in phloem. We might also see root hairs, whose job or function is to absorb water and minerals. Now let's have a look at a transverse section of a root. This means that we are chopping it across and looking into it. Now don't forget, a root is an example of an organ. So if we look into an organ, we would anticipate seeing tissues. So this is what we're going to see here, leading on to the fact that tissues are made of cells. So the first type of tissue that we see in this organ is dermal tissue, sometimes referred to as epidermis. From Latin, you might have heard of dermatitis or dermatology. It means skin. So here, epidermis is referring to outside skin or the outside layer. Now the epidermis has the function of protection. The cells are like the carriages in a train, one after another, closely packed, preventing the entry of pathogens or microorganisms. Sometimes the dermal tissue forms root hairs, which have the job of absorbing water and minerals from the soil. But mainly, dermal tissue has the function of protection. The next tissue to be observed here is ground tissue. Ground tissue is responsible for storing food. If it is green, however, it can carry out photosynthesis. But don't forget, this organ, the root, is found in the ground. So it would be highly unusual if the ground tissue was green. Just to point out, the term ground tissue has nothing to do with being in the actual ground. Roots do not carry out photosynthesis. Then there is a layer of dermal tissue called the endodermis. The endodermis function is also protection, as it allows the root to select what enters the vascular tissue, that is, xylem or phloem. Lastly, we have the vascular tissue. Vascular tissue is transport tissue. It's concerned with carrying water and minerals or food. Xylem tissue carries water and minerals, and we will recognize xylem tissue here immediately because we draw it in the shape of an X, X for xylem. Phloem tissue carries food, O in food as we've said, and O in phloem, and this is represented here in yellow. So in a nutshell, the third type of tissue that we see in this organ is vascular tissue, which is responsible for transporting materials. So just to finish off by saying, you need to be able to draw and label these diagrams and know the functions of the different parts. Don't forget, practicing the jotter. Now that we have reached the end of our lesson, have we achieved our objective? Are you able to describe the function and structure of the root system? Can you explain the term meristem and give its location in the root? Can you locate 3 tissue types, dermal, ground, and vascular, in transverse and in longitudinal sections of the root?